Welcome to the Stronger4Business Podcast with Dyfrig Jenkins, Peter Rushmer and myself, Bev Thorogood. Stronger4Business is a training consortium dedicated to bringing high-quality training solutions to businesses through the combined expertise of our partners. From skills training to developing personal and professional excellence, our mission is to help business owners get the very best from their people at all levels, from boardroom to shop floor. The Stronger4Business podcast is our opportunity to share our knowledge, thoughts and ideas with you, the listener. You'll get to meet some awesome guests from across the business world, sharing their experience of learning and development. If you love what we have to say, make sure you hit the subscribe button on whatever platform you use to consume your podcasts so you don't miss out on future episodes. We'd love to hear from you with your suggestions for discussion topics or ideas for future guests. And if you really love what you hear, please do consider leaving us a 5-star review, as this helps to get the podcast out to a wider audience. Sit back and enjoy the Stronger4Business podcast. Everybody, and welcome to episode 3 of the Stronger4Business podcast. Number 3 already, that's fantastic. So I'm here again today with Dov and Pete, and we're going to be talking about isolation, the impact of social isolation, and maybe we'll look at loneliness and some of the emotions that come out of isolation. So let's just do a quick recap, if we can, of our week. What you've been up to, guys?
Well, I'm quite excited actually, because I recorded the first episode of my podcast, A Half Dozen Things, and I recorded the first episode yesterday. But I'm not looking forward to having to edit it for the first time. So that's exciting.
I enjoy the editing. What's it called?
A Half Dozen Things.
Right, that's the podcast name. I thought that was the title of the episode.
No,
brilliant. Half
name.
Dozen Things. What's it about? What's the premise?
So the premise of it is that I speak to people about their half dozen things. So Jim Rohn wrote that a half dozen things done well and done right will lead to success over time. So I speak to people about what their half dozen things is. So it's about trying to simplify that process.
Fascinating. That sounds good. So when does that come out? When can we expect to hear it? Looking
to publish that in the next couple of weeks.
Fab. Well, let us know, and we'll promote that here as well. Dov, hi. What have you been up to?
Hey. It's been a short week for me actually this week, because it was my daughter's birthday on Monday. So I took the day off, or most of the day off, not all of it, because we still did some work on Monday. So that was good. So quite a short week, and it's been actually quite busy. I think one of the things about having lockdown, and for some people less work to do, or maybe less full days, is there's more opportunity to have conversations, and not conversations just for conversation's sake, but actually quite meaningful conversations as well. So reconnecting with people I literally haven't seen for a while. So the joys of video conferencing and WhatsApp and FaceTime, and also as well having some different forums as well. So this week, I've contacted quite a few people. A few people have been in touch with me. I've been working with an organisation that I partner with called Great People Inside, and they do lots of assessments for managers and leaders. They brought a whole new suite out to support individuals, teams, businesses, and organisations as well. Through COVID, so kind of working from home and all the capabilities that you need as managers and teams to work from home. So that's just been rolled out this week. So I've been learning more about that, having conversations with people about that. And on Thursday, I partnered with somebody that I've only ever met once, actually. And this is the joy of the L&D community, if you like. You meet up with lots of like-minded people. And we did a first virtual meeting for learning and development practitioners and leaders, mostly in large organizations, actually, to talk about COVID, where we are now, and what is it that we need to do to support organizations now, but also in the run-up to the unknown future. So it was a 50-minute virtual meeting. There were people from across the UK, large organizations, mostly in this one from the travel industry, and from financial services as well. So that was really great. Actually, we had a really strong conversation, and people came away with quite a long to-do list afterwards.
Yeah.
And it was so good. We'd already planned another one next week, so we're going to do another one. And if that works really well and people want to do so, more of that, or have more of those meetings with the same people in the future, that we'd kind of facilitate that. So that's kind of a no fee. It's just a way of bringing people together and give them the headspace, if you like, to start to think about what it was. Is really, really good conversation. So, and lots of other stuff in between. So yeah, plenty to do and plenty to think about too.
Yeah, I was gutted I missed it. I'm hoping to get on to the next one, which is next Wednesday.
Next Wednesday, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and is that full now?
I just need to check numbers today, actually. But we've allocated 12 spaces, so 50 minutes, with lots of L&D people who can talk quite a lot. Yeah. Actually, you have to try and keep the numbers. But I think it might already be full. But if next week's full, then we'll put another one on the week after.
Well, if you can squeeze me in next week, give me a space. If not, I'll try and jump on the next one. Do you know, mine's been a week of learning, and I think as trainers and people in the L&D world, we take learning as the norm, don't we? It's certainly for me, personal development in any form is an ongoing thing. I never think, oh, I know it now, I can stop. So I've been learning this week through a challenge that I'm doing via Facebook, how to prepare an evergreen online course, because that's something I've been looking at doing specifically for women struggling with menopause who feel a bit out of control. Maybe they don't feel they're in control of their own menopause, and they're not necessarily getting the best information from their GP. It's just really putting it all together in a form that is easily absorbable for them and actionable. And knowing how much information to put in there, because I think there's a danger we try and throw so much in, and it almost muddies the waters. So it's been a really interesting challenge. I've got huge amounts from it, and it was a free challenge as well. And other than that, I've been playing Uno with Mark and my son, because we couldn't find any playing cards, so we've been playing Uno. Have you ever played Uno?
Yes, great.
Yeah, I love it. Mine love Uno, and they like to play with grown-up cards, and we play Scabby Queen as well. Which is
we do as well. Yeah,
conversation for another day, maybe. So, what do we think about isolation? We've been, what's this, week 6? Is it?
Yeah.
Are we into week 6 now of lockdown? So, I think isolation and loneliness are probably quite prevalent. I think that the timing of this conversation 100%. Is probably quite key. I was thinking about this in the week, sort of thinking about what is isolation and loneliness, because I think we tend to clump them together. And I was trying to kind of figure out in my own head how to define them. And I don't know if you'll agree with this, but I've kind of come up with the thoughts that loneliness is a feeling, it's an emotion, whereas isolation is a situation. And the isolation may lead to the feeling of loneliness, among other feelings. Because I think you can feel lonely without necessarily being isolated. What do you think? I didn't look up any definitions, but that's how in my head I kind of differentiated them.
Yeah, absolutely. So loneliness is like a feeling we get from not having rewarding social contact with people, and those relationships not being met. And it's essentially physically we can be lonely, but emotionally lonely as well, whilst not physically being lonely. For example, we could be present in a room full of people and still feel lonely because no one understands how we feel. So it's quite a complex emotion.
Yeah, you're definitely much more expert on this, Pete, than I am. And it's interesting when I was listening to Bev's explanation and what you just said as well. When we talk with leaders or business owners, so sometimes being a business owner, you can be quite lonely because you've got decisions to make. But you can be surrounded by your team and your customers. And business leaders as well can be quite lonely, especially the more senior you get, because you become more exposed in an organization. But you don't always have people that you can talk to, or at least be honest with about the challenges and stuff they have. So I like that summary.
I think you're more likely to feel loneliness and isolation when there's a change from your norm. Okay, so and what I mean by that is that many people choose to live alone, and that they're happy doing so, and then they go to work and they're happy with that sense of their normality. However, I think there's an unbalance being created in the current situation, which will lead to, essentially loneliness it's individual to each of us. We've each got capacity for loneliness and how how happy we could be on our own for a certain period of time. However, the big thing is around making sure that this change that we've experienced and the unbalance or dis-ease that's caused in our current situation and what we've created for ourselves, I think it's sort of just being able to manage that emotion.
I think isolation brings with it some physical and emotional changes, things like increased anxiety, potential for depression, low mood, eating changes, appetite changes, physical things such as headaches, that sort of thing. There are physical changes that happen, and I think the problem with the situation at the minute is if people were feeling those emotions in the workplace and feeling isolated, because you can feel isolated even within work, if culturally there's disconnects in the organization, you can still feel isolated, especially if when we look at inclusion and diversity. If the inclusion and diversity isn't great, then there are going to be people feeling isolated. But in the working environment, when you've got people around you, there's somebody likely to see those changes and potentially pick up on them. But when we've got so many people now isolating at home and working from home, those visual triggers for colleagues and managers to pick up on are less likely to be seen, especially if you've got potentially poor communication between workers, between colleagues, between managers and their staff. That those triggers, those visual cues, aren't likely to be picked up, and I worry that people are going to get missed in the whole social isolation that we're having to go through right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Because whether you're virtual or whether in work, often, and I've probably done it as well, with my teams in the past, to say, morning everybody, how is everybody? And they'll go, yeah, I'm fine. But fine rarely means fine. Okay, it doesn't often mean okay. But if you're not having those conversations with people, even if they do say that, I'm fine, then you can just take that at face value. But like you said, you are also missing out then as the other person, all those visual clues and things you don't see. Sorry, Peter, I'll cut you off.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I think, like you say, loneliness is a very interesting concept. Like you say, isolation is the physical element of us being alone, but the loneliness is very much a feeling and emotion. And unless people tell us, there's no real way of us knowing. We've got to raise awareness, certainly as leaders in business, or as leaders of people, or as friends and family, that people may be feeling that way. But there's lots of reasons for people to feel lonely. There may be a bereavement. Lots of bereavements going on at the moment. Going through relationship breakups. I've known that relationships are very strained at the moment. People are spending more time together than usual. Losing social contact with people from work, changing jobs, all of the reasons that are listed for loneliness are just happening now to everyone. When people move to a different part of the country or are just isolated from people who they normally have contact with. So it's very, very interesting. And loneliness isn't in itself a mental health problem, but it's strictly, it's very closely linked to potentially causing further issues. So it's very important for us to try and have open conversations as best we can and recognise that it's a challenging time.
And I think it has to be a proactive, not a reactive response, hasn't it? And I've read on LinkedIn, and I'm hearing stories a lot of times about remote workers who are just not being contacted by their co-workers or their managers. I've got one friend who is working from home. She hears from her boss once a week by email, and her boss sends her information from their intranet that she has access to anyway. So it's not even worthwhile content that she's being given. There's just no communication at all, and that's quite frightening. I was reading an article from the website People Management about how does a sense of isolation affect performance, and there was some research done from Belonging Space, the organisation that did the research, And they found that 38% of the people that responded to the survey reported experiencing loneliness in the workplace, while more than a quarter said they did not feel a sense of belonging to their whole organisation. And if that, and this study was done pre-COVID-19, so these are probably people that are working in a workspace as opposed to working from home. And that's a huge number to feel isolated. That's cultural, isn't it? That is a problem at the organisational level of sort of disconnect.
Yeah, absolutely. Organisational culture is massively important, and I think, however, that leads to a leader or a manager in a business thinking it's acceptable to reach out and contact an isolated member of staff via email, which is very, very impersonal. You know, sorry, Dov, I interrupted you. So, but I just wanted to make that point. It's bad, really, isn't it? You know, it's terrific.
But people's behaviours, whether they're team or line manager or whatever level you are in an organisation, if that's the way you communicate with your team anyway, when you're all in the workplace, and I've worked with lots of people that are like that. I'm not saying it's wrong; it's just different. But there's a better way of doing it. Having that mindset when you're working from home and still communicating with your people that way, it's very easy to be critical of people like that, but that's just the way that they are wired, and that's kind of their preference. It's not an excuse, but it's a reason. So, there's a good chance that line manager communicates with that team in work like that anyway. You could assume, but it definitely needs some education. And it's the role of HR people and L&D people and operational leaders to make sure that their managers in the business are working to support their people. But what's interesting as well, we're saying about organizational culture, most organizations globally have a really low level of engagement. And that's very well published. And that varies country by country, region by region, but generally workplace engagement is quite low. So what I'm thinking is maybe, and they might be in the minority, there might be some people who are actually enjoying working from home, because it's easy to disasterize about the whole thing, but people who are not engaged at work, who don't like the colleagues that they work with, this is a bit extreme, but actually might be enjoying their time at home and enjoying time with their family because they might not see their family that often. So, but there's still definitely a need to keep in touch with people because, as we all know, because we've all experienced it, some days you can have a high, the next day you can have a low. That could be a week on week, month on month, realistically, as we go on. So it's even those people that we think are having a nice time at home, whether they're working or furloughed or whatever it might be, it's still really important to check in with them. Especially around those caveats around furloughing, but on a human level, it's important to make sure that people are really okay.
I think there's a danger as well if somebody is naturally quite introverted, quite quiet, quite happy with their own space. There's a potential danger to make an assumption that therefore they don't need any support.
Yes. Yeah.
And actually, if somebody's already quite quiet and introverted and withdrawn, naturally, just by their personality is that type, then the chances are that any negative change in their behaviour is less likely to be picked up and spotted.
Even in the workplace.
Yeah. So, yeah, interesting. And I remember when I first left my job, so I worked for a long time for the public sector, for the Air Force, big organisation. There were nearly 2,000 people on the site that I worked at. I worked in a department of 170 people with a close team of 27 and my own team of 4. So, surrounded by people. And I went from that to suddenly working in a home office on my own. And when I first started working, I wasn't doing face-to-face training. I was doing online coaching. So I didn't even see my clients. My clients were in Portugal and the States. And so I was probably one of the early adopters of Zoom. So I found that really, really hard. And it wasn't something I'd expected or planned for when I made that transition from employee to business owner. And I found it really difficult. I think it was a shock to the system. And I used to find myself going out to places like Costa and Pret to grab a coffee, anywhere that had Wi-Fi. And I would sit and work in coffee shops rather than sitting in the home office, because it felt more comfortable just to have people around me, even if I wasn't actually talking to anybody. And of course, when you bring that forward to now, we can't even do that. We can't even get out and sit in a cafe to do work and get that connection. So it must be really difficult for anybody like me who has quite an extrovert personality to feel confined. And it's certainly over the last couple of weeks, as you know, my mental health has been a bit up and down. I don't feel ashamed to say that. I've had days when it's been really, really low. And I think a lot of that is that inability to get out and feeling isolated, even though I have my husband, my son, my daughter, my granddaughter, all together around me, still feel that sense of isolation.
Yeah, absolutely. And so loneliness, like I said, isn't in itself a mental health condition, but it's so closely linked to the sleep problems as well as increased stress too. So, I've got my personal experience that one of the challenges I've had as an outsourced contractor to other companies is that I've been at home and I've been okay doing my thing and cracking on, but we're so used to having immediate contact and immediate response with people via the various channels that we can get hold of people via phone, etc. And the leaders in that business that I contract to, they in the early stages, they were really busy. They had loads on their plate, furloughing staff and putting management processes in place and what have you. However, there was a level of insecurity for me because from a financial point of view, I knew that organisation was going to be struggling. And that led, one, I felt lonely, but secondly, when I then reached out and couldn't contact them and couldn't get hold of them and wasn't getting a response, all of a sudden the anxiety just spikes hugely because you think, what's going on? What's wrong? Why aren't I getting a response? Have I done something wrong? Am I being frozen out, etc., etc.? And it's so easy for members of staff or team members to feel like that way when they're not getting an immediate response from people. They think automatically this human assumption of we fear the worst straight away and the anxiety spike.
And of course, when you are isolated, your thoughts spiral, don't they? When you're feeling alone, when you haven't got those people sort of as a sounding board to rationalize your thoughts, everything takes on a greater meaning. We have the sort of cognitive distortions that we talk about. There's sort of we catastrophize and we think the worst, and we're pre-programmed to do that, which that's just the way it is. But so what can people do? Obviously we talked about what managers can do in terms of keeping in touch and making sure that we're not leaving people feeling sort of like they're hanging out there on their own. Well, what can people themselves do to try and combat that sense of loneliness?
Yeah, there's loads of things we can do around making connections with people. Certainly having Skype and Zoom meetings. I've seen some great activity from people doing quizzes, whether with their family, whether with their friends, having social events online, like bring your own beer and join a Zoom meet and have a conversation. So they're great ways of trying to get sort of social interaction up. But a big one for me is around like ensuring that we're looking after ourselves and making sure there's lots of self-care going on, that we're eating the right food and exercising. A lot of the things we've been talking about over the past couple of weeks, physical activity to keep ourselves in the right shape, healthy body, healthy mind, looking after ourselves. I think they're the key tips from me.
Yeah, for me as well, I think it's always easier said than done, but just recognizing it. So, when you do go for that extra bag of crisps or, that extra bottle of beer on a Tuesday night or a bottle of beer on a Tuesday night or, whatever it might be, just recognizing that you're doing it. And it's not to call yourself out and say you're a bad person, because you're not. Because, if you choose to eat an extra bag of crisps or whatever, then that's fine, isn't it? But when that becomes a habit, then it's just recognizing that change and thinking, am I okay with this? Or am I not okay with this? Do I need to do something with it or not? Because some of it is around personal choice, not all of it, because we're very complex creatures. But it's just, and that's what I tend to kind of self-manage, if you like. If I think, well, I'm not doing enough exercise, or do you know what, I'm going to break my rule about having no alcohol in the week. Weekends are different, but no alcohol in the week, just to try and balance that. And if I see that, thinking, well, why have I done that? And kind of self-coach a little bit. and just to recognize it. And then, you can do, it's your choice then, do you do something about that or not? But it's just recognizing those things in yourself. And if you do feel lonely, what can you do about it? And you might be on a day you're thinking, actually, I don't want to speak to anybody today. And you hear a lot about Zoom fatigue. That is definitely a thing. I had that Wednesday for the first time. I finished a full day. I was on Zoom nearly all day. And I said to my wife, I said, I feel like I've been watching TV all day. No, we wouldn't do that, would we? We wouldn't. Well, we might do. But if we sat down all day and watched Netflix and binged all day, that's so tiring for your head. That's more or less what we're doing now. So, and it's just recognizing, I think, well, actually, maybe I need to do a little bit less of that every day, and kind of, where possible, manage your diary and manage your time and things like that as well. So, for me, it's just about self-regulation, self-management. But I appreciate it's harder for some people than it is for others.
I think there's a danger, certainly in going back to the story that I told before about when I first left work. There was a few things really. First of all, I felt like I was embarrassed to admit that I felt lonely. Mm-hmm. That was a big one. Possibly that's not quite the case now, because I think so many people are in that position where they are isolated that it's not so uncommon to expect feelings of loneliness. But certainly for me, it was an embarrassment to me to be feeling lonely, because I'd made that choice. It was my choice to walk away from the busy environment and do my own thing. And the other thing for me was actually all of the people who I could have contacted in the early days. It was before I'd made sort of a business. I didn't have a business network. Networking was a game changer for me in terms of isolation and feeling lonely. But I didn't feel comfortable ringing up and chatting to old work colleagues, because I thought, well, they won't want me to be telling them what I'm doing, because my life's moved on and they've got their own cliques. And although I had a great relationship with the people I worked with, once I detached myself from it, it felt uncomfortable picking up the phone and just to make small talk. It felt, I don't know, for me, it just didn't feel comfortable. So I think there's a danger that we think everybody else is either too busy or not interested in talking to us, and we'll have better things to do. And that's probably, it's probably a result of the sort of the negative self-talk anyway, and sort of talking ourselves into the problem. But I think what I'm trying to get at, I suppose, is we shouldn't be making assumptions that other people aren't going to be interested in talking to us. And rather than waiting for people to contact us and then feeling disillusioned because they don't, actually make that move and get in touch with other people. Because what I did find was actually when I did start to make those calls or to get in touch with people, they were really interested to know what I was doing, and all of the concerns that I had weren't really concerns at all.
It is really interesting, actually, because like you guys, we've got a similar network of people, and we tend to chat as small business owners, especially in the area that we all live, fairly often. Every now and again, you'll see a name pop up on LinkedIn as an example, and I go, I've not seen that or spoken to that person before. I'll just send a message, and they go, oh, Dev, it's really nice to hear from you. And often it's the people that you don't expect to say that, and maybe the people from 10 years ago. I'm not going back any further, maybe a little bit longer than 10 years ago, or in more recent times as well. I went up just before COVID, actually, and I drove up to Newark to see an old line manager who I've not seen for 8 or 9 years. We went to a mutual friend's wedding, and it was only half an hour, but it was worth the drive, because sometimes we've got to put ourselves, we can't do that now physically, but put ourselves out to kind of make sure that we retain the friendships and the professional relationships that we've got as well. So, and again, like Peter was saying a couple of weeks ago, everybody's in crisis mode. Everybody's just trying to furlough staff and trying to keep the lights on. Essentially, it's a little bit different now. It's a different kind of stress, different kind of pressure. But human contact is really important. And some people want it, and some people don't. And some people don't want it now, but they might want it on a different day. So it's worth just I really don't like the term reaching out. You know that.
Yeah.
but it's really common. But yeah, it's important.
I read another. Sorry, Pete. Was I?
No, you carry on. You carry on.
I read another article. You can tell I've got a lot of time on my hands to do some reading. Looking at the effect isolation has on the human body and the human brain, and they were talking about this guy in America. He was a US poker player, and he bet $100,000 that he could survive alone in the dark in isolation for 30 days for $100,000. And I think he thought it would be quite easy, He didn't manage it. He got to day 20 and negotiated his release with a payout of $62,000. So he just couldn't hack it. And the article went on to talk about what that kind of level of isolation does to the body. And within 3 days, he was having hallucinations. 3 days. Wow. That's not much at all, is it? So they were talking about the effect of the dark and the fact, social isolation down to COVID-19 doesn't mean we're all living in solitary confinement in a pitch black room. But what was interesting was the hallucinations, but also the impact it had on his circadian rhythm, because obviously we were guided by daylight to keep our body clock and our melatonin levels working as they should. And at a not so extreme point, I think working from home and not having that routine is probably screwing up a lot of people's circadian rhythms as well. We haven't got the normal get up time, go to bed time. I don't know about you guys, but I'm finding that I'm going to bed much later, but I'm still trying to get up at the same time. And actually that's not great for your mental health. That increases stress. But it's just interesting to see the impact that social isolation to that extreme, how quickly it has a negative impact on the mind and the body.
So yeah, that really, and that is so interesting. It links in really well to one of the things that I'd been reading that I wanted to raise was around, do you feel really exhausted after Zoom calls all day? And so I was reading a bit about that from some therapists, and they were discussing what's called plausible deniability of absence. And it's this idea that our minds are being tricked into the idea of being together, but our bodies aren't. And there's a dissonance that's totally exhausting. So if you want to know, it's sort of easier being in each other's presence than absence, and therefore, so when you're in the presence of others, as we are via Zoom, but actually physically in the absence of them, our bodies process so much context from how we behave and our body language. We essentially on a Zoom we sense too little and are unable to imagine enough, and that causes like this deprivation, and it requires a lot of effort to sort of try and overcome that, and that's what's so exhausting. It's quite interesting.
It's fascinating. Yeah. Can you send me that link? That'll be.
I will. Yeah, I will. Yeah. I will. Really, really interesting.
One of the things that I picked up from that, and this might sound a little bit out there, and I have no science backing for this, but if you think about it, if we are bundles of energy, which we are, that's it. We're energy balls, and if we're disconnected, so we're just looking at a Zoom screen, we've got a lot of energy going out in the mental processing. But we have none of the residual energy that we would get back from the physical proximity to other people. And yeah, I know that sounds a bit out there, doesn't it? But it seems to me that we move energy around, and when we're in physical proximity to somebody, we're sharing each other's energy. And it's kind of giving back what we're using in brain energy. All right, don't laugh. I can see you both looking at me like I've gone nuts. Does that even make any sense?
Not at all. It makes total sense.
I'm an energetic being, a spiritual being.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know enough about it, but you can walk into a room and it's intangible, it's palpable, isn't it? You can walk in and say, there's a lot of energy in this room. We all know as facilitators, we walk into a room and go, wow, I feel the energy in here. And I say that sometimes because I think it's a good way of recognizing that in starting sessions or as you go through, or you just recognize that there isn't a lot of energy in the room. So there's this whole bit about psychology that I don't know enough about, so I'm not going to talk about. But there's definitely something in the exchange between humans and other animals and things as well. So there's definitely going to be something in that.
I'm going to put that down to quantum physics. I might not have articulated it very well, but I'm sure there's something in what I've just said. I might go and do a bit of research.
I think maybe we might, and maybe that's a good thing for all the listeners to do as well. Actually, just, if this is a point of interest, actually just go out and find out a bit more about this, because it's that part of the human psychology that most of us don't know anything about, but it's just fascinating if nothing else. It's interesting what you're saying about routine as well, and I'm one for routine typically, maybe because of like my holiday industry background, where we had, on time was late. We were never allowed to be on time. We always had to be early for work, whereas it's quite different to me in my teens when I was late for everything. But I'm having a bit of a battle with one of my daughters at the moment. It's like, why do we have to have a routine for everything, Daddy? You're driving me mad. So but if you didn't, then nothing would get done. It's one of my daughter's jobs to feed the dog at 8 o'clock in the morning, which is 10 to 9 this morning. It's like, can you just please feed the dog? She's like, leave me alone. Why do you have to nag me? It's like, well, if you did everything you needed to do, you'd actually have an easier life. So, because I wouldn't be going, have you fed the dog yet, every morning? So, so having a routine is important, whether we think it is or not. Especially about going to bed at a reasonable hour, because if we are binge watching on Netflix until 1 o'clock in the morning and still having to do something at 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, starting work, it's, for many of us, it's still a working day. So it's just trying to manage, make sure that we're eating well, we drink enough water, all those kind of things, exercising, but we're getting enough sleep as well, because sleep deprivation is not good for any of us. That's not good for our mental health and our physical health.
Massively important. I think it's so important, sleep, so important to the way we function physically, our digestive systems from a physical point of view, and obviously our stress levels as well. Excuse me. One of the things that I wanted to explore sort of just briefly, which I find quite interesting, I've picked up on personally from experience of maternity leave and paternity leave and absence from the workplace. And that's this social phobia or social anxiety around going back to normal. And I've certainly experienced it firsthand with my wife, Maggie. I'm sure she's got no issue with me discussing that. But when she's had the children, she spends so much time at home with the children with less adult contact, potentially on school runs and what have you, but much less contact. But then that feeling of anxiety when it was time to return to normal, go back to work after a period of absence, several months or what have you, from a maternity leave. And we're going to have quite a few people returning to work soon that have had that same experience and potentially are feeling that social anxiety of actually, hang on, I've kind of got used to that new normal, and now I'm having to have a change back, and I think that's going to cause an inflated anxiety as we return to work.
I'm hearing a lot of that at the moment. Yeah, on an individual with friends, but also as well, on work calls and on the L&D forum conversation that we had earlier in this week. That's definitely going to be. And again, we can exaggerate it, but I think it's important that we prepare for it, especially for people who work in medium-sized and large-sized businesses where you've got a large workforce, and not exclusively, small businesses and teams of, small teams, small businesses as well. But it's definitely something to look out for.
I think you're right.
Realistically, it's only in the last 150 years, last 150 years since the Industrial Revolution, we've all been going out to work. So actually what we're doing now is still quite a new thing in historical terms. So we've almost like regressed back into the early 1800s from the way that we work, where we don't leave our small communities and things like that. Yeah. So it's quite interesting.
I think awareness, as you said earlier, is the key. Recognizing that these feelings are normal and they're likely to happen. Bit of a sort of personal anecdote. When my husband was in the Air Force, and he'd be away on detachment for 3 or 4 months at a time, we'd go through there were certain emotions that were almost commonplace. They were generally across the board with all couples who were separated on detachment, and it would be that sort of sense of loss at the beginning, and then I suppose it's a change curve. You go through the emotions at the start, and then over the months that they're away, you get into a new normal. But then as the date of their time to come back from detachment gets closer, the whole social anxiety, the anxiety around what's going to be different Is it, are we going to be able to get back to the way we were? And you know what? You don't go back to the way you were, because we're always moving forward. It's just that when we move forward at the same rate, we don't notice the changes. But knowing and recognizing that there is a pattern of behavior and a pattern of feelings and emotions that are going to happen, it doesn't mean that they're not going to happen because you know about them, but knowing about them means you can manage them and feel normal about them, and not feel in some way, well, back to that isolation of being the only person going through this.
Again, I've not experienced what you said, but I would imagine, and this happens a lot in the military, doesn't it, globally, where somebody leaves the home, and then actually, for that period of time, a new routine happens. And then that person comes back into that domestic situation and then upsets their routine, because in their mind, it's going back to on the day they left almost. Yeah. So I imagine it can be quite disruptive.
There's loads of emotions that come up. There's frustration, there's anger, there's guilt, because you love your husband or you love your partner, you want them back home, but they walk in the door, and once the honeymoon period of the hugs and kisses and lovely to have you back has passed, which is normally fairly short, to be honest, the frustration kicks in, and you're back to kind of, well, no, this is the way we do things now. And it does cause problems, and it's going to be the same, I think, going back into the workplace, because people will have found new ways of doing things.
Systems and processes will have changed.
I know we've got to cut this one a little bit short, because we all have appointments to go to, which is quite nice, isn't it, when you consider that we're I don't know about you guys, I feel like I'm busier now than I've ever been, but I don't seem to be producing as much. But any thoughts before we go? Let's do a quick recap. What have you learned this week? I know, Pete, you were talking about the psychological stuff that you've been reading. What else have you learned?
So in sort of thought process of talking on this podcast, I've done a bit of research. There's just a couple of final things that I'd like to add to tie up, really, and one was getting serious for a moment. Refuge has had a 700% increase in calls from domestic abuse situations, and I think that we need to recognise that there's been a real imbalance in people's home lives, and that presents a real challenge, and we need to be very sympathetic towards that, and we need to be very sympathetic as people return to work and in the way we're contacting them. So that was one thing I wanted to raise, and then the second one was I've seen a really, really great program or campaign released by Peterborough Council around mental health this week, and it's called keepyourhead.com. Okay, and there's a helpline which is 01733 747474, which is the usual council telephone number that you'd ring for your bins and what have you, but there is a helpline on there to essentially to support people with any challenges they're facing. They've got the access to all of the free therapy that would usually be in place through the NHS.
Is this just for Peterborough residents, or is it for anybody?
I believe it's for anyone. So it's all essentially the signposting. If you're in a different geographical location, they'll be able to signpost you to your local support if that's necessary too. So I think that's a great resource they've put together. And there's a lot of people that have tried to imitate something similar, but actually this is sort of the big campaign, and it looks fantastic.
Brilliant. We'll put the link and the telephone number in the notes for the show. Brilliant. Great initiative. Dev, what you learned this week?
For me, it's ongoing learning. So I'm still giving myself a news diet. I'm not going on social media because there's just, typically, the media thrives off the stuff that's not happy news generally. So I'm staying off the fake news, if you like. I'm limiting the amount of actual, and I use that in inverted commas, news, because there's a lot of really good stuff going on out there. There's lots of people surviving this. There's lots of businesses that are remaining fluid, if you like. So it's just for me, it's maintaining a sense of realism and a sense of balance. But touching on what Peter was saying, make sure that you stay in touch with family and friends. I FaceTime videos my auntie this week, and it was, and so one of those things I thought, why have I not done this sooner? It's been 6 weeks and we get on really well. Now, I don't see her that often. She lives in Wales, but it's just making sure that you stay in touch with people for your own sake as much as for others as well. And just, and just make the most of the opportunity. For those of us that can, just make sure that you make the most of the opportunity. Enjoy the time with your family and friends. If you live with people, and make sure you just get out and get some fresh air and stuff as well. Yeah, I think on the topic of loneliness and mental health and stuff, which we'll start talking about over the next month as well, is just making sure that we look after ourselves first, as well as looking after other people. Yeah.
Brilliant. Well, my learning this week has been all around course creation, as I've already said, and I'm very much a trainer. Flip chart and post-it notes are my staples. But I learned to use Trello. I don't know if anybody's used Trello.
Yeah.
What a great tool. Oh my God. So Trello, for anybody that doesn't know, Trello is an online app that you can use for planning purposes, and it's sort of different boards with lists, and it's fantastic. I'm loving it. So that was my learning today, or this week rather, and I'm going to go and do a bit more work on Trello. And you can make it all colourful and pretty and everything. It's great.
It's a great tool. It's a really, really good tool. And you can bring people in and collaborate and do all sorts of cool stuff with it.
Mm-hmm. Anyway, on that note, I know you have to get away, Pete. So thank you very much, guys.
Good to talk to you.
Good to talk. Good to stay in touch. Let's not stay isolated. Let's keep collaborating and just keeping each other sane.
More next week.
Yeah, more next week.
See you next Friday.
Take care. See you soon, guys. Bye. Bye.
Thank you for joining us on the Stronger for Business podcast. Final thought before we go. In the words of Albert Einstein, education is not the learning of facts, but the training of the mind to think. Have a great week. Join us next Friday for our next episode of the Stronger for Business podcast.